Ons gaan nou praat oor die provoking van Russia.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel where we provide an alternative view to the common narrative. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the terrorist attacks on Russian cities, infrastructure, assassination of their editors, journalists, and the recently bombed bridge in Crimea and how this affects the war and etc.
Do you know all the people's names?
There's a lot of Russian names. I'll try my best.
Okay, before we actually start, maybe you've noticed we have now 2 microphones. So this is our first test run and see how it goes.
So you can hear me a little bit better.
Yeah, maybe not that echo that we had. So hopefully it goes better, but as I said, we will try to make the presentation, improve on the presentation as we go along and as we sort of expand and get new ideas and so on.
Mine's nice and fancy, it's gold.
In any case, well, if you look at the special military operation or the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, it depends on how you want to call it, there has been a lot of call it unallowed, basically, tactics that were used by the Ukrainians. And actually, you could say that these are not sabotage effect, but the civilians were targeted. Now, if you target civilians, firstly, that is a war crime.
Yeah.
And secondly, it is a terrorist act, because terrorist act means you terrorize the population.
It's plain dirty.
Yeah, and that's basically what Ukraine is doing. And actually, then you should, since the West is supporting Ukraine, then you can now call the West as countries that support terrorism, something which the America would actually like to classify Russia with. But Russia doesn't target civilian people.
If you look at the actual buildings they target, it's mostly Ukrainian infrastructure, where when Ukraine attacks Russia, it's always people die. There's, like the shellings of the old people. Like I said, the assassination on the RT, Russian television. The journalist and chief editor, I think.
Chief editor, yes.
Yeah, she's beautiful. But yeah, so essentially, it's way more than. I don't think there's any attacks on civilians from Russia's side. I'm not really quite sure.
No,
but
they don't really target civilians. Putin made it very clear from the start of the SMO that they only target military targets. But unfortunately, war is war, and civilian targets cannot be avoided. So when the Russians bombed those NATO people and the Russian commanders at that restaurant, unfortunately, civilian people were killed. But that was not the target. The target was the military personnel.
But why are military personnel surrounded by civilians? Is my question. Is it by chance?
No, it's actually, these guys probably went out for a coffee or a lunch in normal time. And they didn't think about that they would be targeted. So you could say they were not innocently sitting, but unaware sitting there and having lunch or whatever, or a cup of coffee or beer. And then they were targeted by the Russians by a precision missile. Probably they estimate it was an Iskander missile. Now, Iskander missile is a fairly large missile, very precise, and it has a huge explosive hit. So the damage would have been significant, and you wouldn't be able to avoid civilian people.
Okay.
But Ukraine is actually renowned for that they use civilian people as human shields. So when they had the Mariupol attack, they took positions up in hospitals and schools as firing positions. They surrounded them with civilians. They put up their rocket launchers and the artillery between residential areas, buildings and so on, and fired from that. So unfortunately, in that respect, also a number of people were killed.
It's easy way to play the victim almost.
Yeah, well, it's a good propaganda talking point for Zelensky.
Yeah.
But one knows to always, I've explained last time that there are about three groups. Zelensky as a group, as the leadership. And then you have the so-called Nazis, the right wings. And then you have the normal military. And then actually you still have the Secret Service as well. Now, the radicals, the Nazi groups and so on, they actually hate the Russians. So for them, killing civilian people it's nothing for them. Also killing the Russian soldiers. They have made many videos available on that where they actually committed the war crimes and shot, injured, or even normal Russian soldiers and executed them. So it's not something really new to what the Ukrainians have done. And also, I mean, we talked about civilian people targeting. I mean, the Ukrainians have done it for the last 8 years. They have bombarded Donetsk city and Lugansk, cities in Lugansk Oblast. I'm not totally sure if they bombed Lugansk city itself. At the beginning of the 2014-2015 conflict, the rebels or the Donbass militia drove them far away back from Lugansk city that they didn't do it.
Because when the news came out that Russia and Ukraine are at war, no one knew about the 8-year conflict that's been happening, and that it's neo-Nazis on the Ukrainian border that are actually attacking Russian people. I mean, no one knew about it. They just, you just heard, Ukraine's a sovereign country and they're being threatened by Russia now.
I mean, if you look at in the northern region, there's Belgrade and there's Kharkiv city. And then there are many cross-border raids done by Ukrainian soldiers. And then they physically shoot and target civilian people and civilian target infrastructure, not any military aspects. And in the last one they actually did it, there were about, I think, 5 vehicles or so destroyed and about 30 men. And these are all the radicals, and I'm not always sure whether they function under the general military command or under Zelensky itself or under Zelensky, who's in charge of the military. So these are, I believe, sometimes some rogue elements.
Definitely.
And because they physically target civilian people. Then you also had that, that's now why we unfortunately get stuck, and you know me by now, I forget names. But there was this daughter of this famous philosopher that was killed in a car bomb. That is a terrorist act. Then there was a journalist, a Russian journalist, that was killed in St. Petersburg by also a bomb. That's a terrorist act. Then there's now a threat. I mean, we all know about the kill list that Ukraine has, where a number of people are actually listed.
Is Putin on there?
Yeah, well, Putin is there, but even Scott Rutte is there.
Oh.
Yeah.
Dear.
And Elon Musk was there for a while. But he was took off the list because he was sponsoring the Starlink systems to the Ukrainians. But, in any case, too far away. So these killings are more concentrated on Russian people.
It sounds like almost like mostly people that are journalists or people that spread the news about what's happening. So I guess it's kind of easy to control the narrative if everyone's dead.
Yeah, but the Ukrainians specifically call them as traitors and anti-Ukrainians and so on. But they are not Ukrainians, so, only a citizen of a country can become a traitor. And that's the problem with Julius Assange as well. I mean, he's not an American citizen, so he can't be
Australian,
a traitor. Yeah. But coming back to the events now, for the last 8 years, they bombarded Donetsk. They bombarded, for the next year and a half of the SMO, they bombarded the Donetsk city. And physically targeting markets, residential areas, open plains gatherings, Even when the Russians withdrew from Kherson city, they had to cross the river. And the Ukrainians actually bombed a civilian withdrawal from Kherson. So they physically targeted the civilians. Then they were also, I believe, I can't remember what city, they were also moving away to the Russian side. The Ukrainians deliberately bombed with artillery the withdrawing Ukrainian citizens, which was probably Russia, and killed a lot of the civilian people. So I cannot understand. I don't think the Western population is aware of all these atrocities. I mean, Zelensky is call it a big actor. Well, he's fairly a good actor, actually.
Yeah.
And he always blames Russia. Now, if you have watched the news for a long time and so like I did, you will always notice that the Americans always blame the opposition, especially the Russians, before the war, of doing the things that they were actually doing. And I think Zelensky saw that and adopted that type of strategy. Or he was taught by the Americans to do the same. Okay.
Yeah. So we're speaking about the terrorists or war crimes committed on the Russian people. So today is the 17th July. I think, yeah, it happened either this morning or the 16th July, depending on where you live in the world. But Crimea Bridge, dis moet daar uithaal. Ek het sê Crimea Bridge. Okay, stop daar sê.
Nee, kom weer dink dan.
Ek kan mos nie dit insit nie. Okay, sorry, I misspoke. The Crimea Bridge was bombed today or yesterday or whatever. I think it's by two unmanned boats. But I'm not quite sure. Oh, it's
no, it was done by two surface UAVs, which is by boat.
Okay. Where a married couple, husband and wife, died, and their 14-year-old daughter got severely injured. She's luckily stable now, but she's now an orphan. I mean, losing your parents, and this is a very emotional subject. So that brings me back to the idea of what is Ukraine's intention of, they are losing this counteroffensive. I mean, there's no counteroffensive happening. So now what are these pointless bombings? What are they actually achieving?
Well, just for the sakes, I was quite amazed at the damage that was caused, and when I heard about the UAVs that were boats and so on, it's like boats that it's a very shallow bridge. It's not on the main Kherson bridge or Crimea that we all know. It's more on the flatlands, and so they must have loaded these boats with huge amount of explosives, and as they went under the bridge, they had to blow it up. And I knew when you read this morning the article, you were quite upset about these people that died. I mean, it's a near type of strategy.
It wasn't just me. If you read the comments on the articles, majority of people, they got so upset, which is understandable. And, they were calling for Putin to, wipe out Ukraine, or this is enough. It's time to nuke Kiev or assassinate Zelensky. I mean, it's all from an emotional...
Yeah, but that's the point. That's the objective of these things. The objective of terrorist acts is to mobilize the population. Not to mobilize the population in order to support you, but in order to pressurize their own government. And that is actually precisely what's happening. But there are two forces in Russia. The more modern ones that understand the war and understand casualties and understand what Putin's objective is. And then there are the more aggressive type of people that would like to go ahead and wondering why this whole war is going so slow. And those are precisely the people that Zelensky and Ukraine are targeting in order to get emotional. Now, if you get emotional about anything, then you usually make errors.
Make stupid decisions.
Yeah, and you can overreact. And Zelensky was hoping that they would overreact. And typically, if they overreact and they do something which is not really seen as acceptable in the world, then Zelensky will again, and America and Europe will exploit it as political and propaganda-wise. and that would maybe set support of Russia backwards. And even the guys might hope that the friends that Russia have will basically stand back and sever that relationship. And maybe then they would be able to support or willing to support the West in their sanction regime against Russia, and that will bring the Russian economy down and maybe force Putin to withdraw from Russia. So that's more, I think, the logic that goes behind it. It's quite interesting that this now happened after the NATO meeting in Vilnius. So I would have presumed it would have been done earlier so that at least Russia would have reacted before the NATO meeting. But it was only done now. So maybe there was some circumstantial problems or changes that had to be done that has been postponed.
Now, how far are they willing to push this? If Putin has enough control of his emotions, how far, until Russia reacts, how far are they willing to or able to push it? And then how can Putin, react in a way that's actually acceptable?
Oh, no, unacceptable for Putin to react. Well, again, firstly, there was that dam, the Kherson area, I can't now remember this dam's name. And it was always threatened to be blown up. While that was before last year, before the Russians withdrew from Kherson area. So they would have blown the dam up, and then they would have cut the Russians from their supply lines, and that would be bad. And then Surovikin saw that and withdrew the troops to this side, to the eastern side of the river. But the act of sabotaging the hydroelectric plant and the dam wall is a seriously problem. And they always threatened to do it. They did bomb it unsuccessfully until a couple of weeks back, where they broke the dam.
A lot of people.
Now, I'm not totally sure how they exploded it. I was always thinking they had some of precision artillery, like the Excalibur, or they had something else, a UIV with a significant precision ammunition or precision guidance system. But in fact, they blew it up. And that caused an environmental disaster. And they were quite happy to do it because, again, it's not Ukrainian dying. They see it as the traitors Russian, because the Kherson Oblast was incorporated into Russia. So they don't care much about polluting the environment and so on. And then the other thing is also, this water actually is used for the cooling of the Zaporizhzhia power plant. Now, with the dam wall down, the water levels have considerably retreated, and it could have caused problems to the Zaporizhzhia power plant and the cooling system, which has luckily been prevented. And so they would have even considered or willing to cause a nuclear accident at the Zaporizhzhia area. The problem with the Zaporizhzhia power station is not only the radioactive material inside the reactor, but it is also used as a huge storage areas of used or spent uranium fuel. So any bomb in there would have caused, would the effect have of a dirty bomb. It will pollute the environment. Now, last year they have tried to attack the power plant. They have sent some UAVs there. They have destroyed a roof and so on, but that was about it. They sent some commandos over the lake. Those were annihilated and pushed back. And so they are prepared to blow up the nuclear power plant. And again, a week or so ago, a little bit more maybe, I believe, Zelensky is accused Russia of aligning the water, the cooling system with explosives. And Russia is trying to use it as blow up the plant and use it as a false flag. But again, like I said, if they accuse you, then you should be prepared that they are willing to do it. And Russia has never made any threats of any catastrophic this. In fact, they have occupied that plant from the beginning for the precise reason of the Ukrainians not exploiting and making a disaster out of it. And that's why they are in control of. But in any case, Zelensky went on and on and on and accused it. So everybody thinks that that was like a precursor for a Ukrainian attack. And again, if it happens, it's not Ukrainians are dying, it's Russians are dying. And there were some military drills, in any case, done in Kiev and cities nearby. And they thought that Kiev would not be influenced. But if you looked at Chernobyl and the effect it had, it went right over, the contamination went right over Europe. So nobody is safe then when the Zaporizhzhia area will explode. But it's the fuel that is stored there that is the biggest danger. And they are prepared to do it. So
it's
you
like
cannot put anything
thinking
before them that they won't do it. Now, naturally, if that happens, Putin will see that he has to see it as a nuclear attack. And in the Russian doctrine, it says clearly that if Russia attacked by a nuclear means, then they have the right to retaliate by nuclear bombs. Now, if then Putin has said, and he probably would have had to done it because the pressure from the population would have been enormous, and from his commanders, etc., they would have had to bomb something. Now, I don't think he would bomb Kiev because that's too many deaths. But he would have bombed a smaller city, maybe 10,000, 20,000 that would have been killed, and that's it. But then West again sees that as a nuclear attack, and then according to their own doctrines, they can retaliate. And if they retaliate, that's the World War. That is the objective of Zelensky. He wants to draw in NATO. And in our previous video, I talked to you why. I mean, he has according to his culture, he's right. Not that I agree with him, but in his own thinking, I can understand why he thinks as he thinks. And he actually demands the support and the
assistance?
No, not really assistance, the commitment, or the final commitment of NATO to physically send troops and ammunition and so on. Because there's a lot of things that, if you really look at the response of NATO, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's everything is half-hearted. Everything is like they don't have enough ammunition. They don't have enough soldiers. They're not prepared to send their own soldiers. They don't send the newest stuff. They don't mobilize the military-industrial complex, which I actually doubt they do, because if you hear about this, the biggest business in America is the military-industrial complex. The biggest aim of any foreign policy of America is to sell arms. So surely if they sell arms, they have a huge military-industrial complex. And if they have a huge military-industrial complex, then they should have a huge manufacturing capability. It's not only F-35s building or a couple of tanks building. They must have enough factories to do it, because that is the core business of America, selling arms. So I don't understand why the Americans are so-called have empty stores and so on. I mean, they had the war in Iraq. There would have been 2 wars. Afghanistan, the bombardment of Syria and Libya. Oh, I can't believe that they don't have enough ammunition. So I cannot understand the non-commitment from this. Because
do you have any possible options, or that they would not fully commit? Because you say that you don't understand why they don't, or what are some plausible...
See, everybody thinks that World War III will be nuclear arms, nuclear chains. And there's a big chance of that in terms of reality. There are 4,000 in the Russian side, 4,000 on the American side, more or less. And if they fire them, they will all be destroyed. So everybody's thinking about that, but nobody will. I'm telling you straightforward, anybody that presses that button to release those weapons, he will think about 10 times and another 100 times. So they would rather go, in my opinion, to a conventional war. I don't think they will ever commit, unless it becomes existential defeat. So if NATO, say, defeats Russia, and they move to the Russian border, and if they don't stop and they go over the Russian border, then again the Russian doctrine says existential threat, and there we go, because they have no other. Israel actually has the same type of policy. If Israel is threatened, they will fire their nuclear arrows, and they do have, even if they deny it, but they will destroy whoever is attacking them in a last final act of spite or whatever.
So, I mean, the end of the world for everyone.
Yeah.
If you can't
so
have
anybody
it
that would do a conventional war has to stop at the border of the Russian Federation, unless he wants to have nuclear exchange. And but you know, at the end of the day, we talked about it. We have the buildup of the Polish soldiers on the Belarusian border. I talked about the incursions from Ukrainian soldiers into the Belgorod area. So all it needs is
one fanatic
lieutenant or captain to put some troops in there, go over the border and kill some Belarusians. And then we have the Second, the Third World War. And I believe that is how it will escalate, in my opinion, in any case. Because, like I always said, the Polish people are not like in their mind.
Absolutely insane.
Yeah. But interestingly enough, that just before they blew up the Crimea Bridge and so on, there was a fairly significant attack on the Sevastopol fleet, Russian fleet, which were all shot down. So I think it was a coordinated effort. So they put the Russian fleet under pressure, and in the meantime, 2 boats passed them, 2 UAVs, and then blew up the bridge, which wasn't a bad strategic idea. It was quite significant. But then on the other hand is, you know, they should have probably released these UAVs from Odessa or nearby. And to Crimea is a fairly far distance, 200 or 300 kilometers. Now, in order to steer these UAVs, you need some communication system. And with who do they talk? Did they talk only with GPS? Or was there any video feedback that these boats gave to the Ukrainian operators? And if you think about this, that they had to explode beneath these bridges, you know, GPS it doesn't have an accuracy of that much. So there should have been some form of visual feedback, and that would have been either by satellite, which will be American satellites, or it would be by a Predator drone or some other UAV flying in the Black Sea. And we remembered that they would have flown in international waters, but Russia doesn't consider that as international waters anymore, because there's a war on. And we know that a couple of months ago, the Russians actually tried to harassed a Predator drone until it actually crashed. And the Americans were upset, but the Russians warned them. So I believe there was some American UAV flying around in that area guiding these boats. So the Russians allow this type of incursions of the Predator up to a certain point because they believe they can handle it. The same with the delivery of NATO and American weapons. Sending 30 Abrams tanks or 30 Leopard tanks is something that the Russian military can handle fairly easy. But if they now decide to send 200 or 300, and that is the red line being crossed. And so one has to basically understand what the Russians would tolerate. It is 30 tanks is not enough to press the so-called red button, but not the nuclear red button, the red button to attack NATO. But saying 300, then it would be considered as a real commitment by NATO, and then Russia will see NATO as a aggressor, full-time aggressor, and then it will start bombing strategic places in Europe itself. Mostly probably in Poland, because that's just the gathering station for all these weapons.
Yeah. Also takes out the Polish Strait.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for joining us. And as always, like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends.
Until next time. Cheers.
Goodbye.